This is the Read, Write, and Create podcast, the podcast where you get a bite-sized session of creative writing coaching from me, Lori L. Tharps. I'm a journalist and a former college professor who moved to the south of Spain so I could live a global literary life. I'm also an award-winning author of both fiction and nonfiction who believes in the transformative power of a story well told. I created this podcast because I want to help as many BIPOC writers as possible get their stories out of their heads and into the world. Are you ready? Let's go. Welcome to our first episode in our special Behind the Book season of the Read, Write, and Create podcast. If you're keeping track, this is season 5 of our award-winning show. For this Behind the Book season, instead of speaking with legendary authors, we will be speaking to people who work in the book business, people whose livelihoods depend on the free-flowing circulation of books in the world. Now, I was motivated to produce this season by the frightening uptick of government-sanctioned book bans and intentional erasure of BIPOC stories in the United States, but like Alelia Walker, I am a joy goddess at heart, and I want these episodes to inspire you and motivate you to keep writing. Today's guest will definitely leave you inspired. My guest for this episode is Emely Rumble. Emely is a distinguished licensed clinical social worker, school social worker, and seasoned psychotherapist. She has over 14 years of professional experience. Emely is committed to making mental health services more accessible, so she specializes in something called bibliotherapy, which you will hear more about in the episode. A distinguished member of the National Association of Poetry Therapy, Emely's work has been featured in respected publications such as Parents Magazine, School Library Journal, Bold Journey Magazine, BronxNet News, and The Bronx is Reading. Emely likes to share her expertise beyond traditional avenues through her dedicated platforms on Instagram, TikTok, and Podia, where she provides valuable educational content. Now, even though I just said I'm not interviewing authors for this season, Emely is a brand new author whose new book, Bibliotherapy in the Bronx, just came out if you're listening to this in real time, and we will talk about the book during the episode. I don't know how many of you beautiful BIPOC writers out there listening knew that bibliotherapy was a thing or even what it's all about. So that's why I wanted her here to share with you that bibliotherapy means that the stories that you're writing right now might be the key to someone else's healing, and that there are people who go to school to study how to use literature in their therapy practices. And the best part? It was a Black American woman who is considered the godmother of this practice of bibliotherapy. Again, you'll hear all about this in the episode. I really hope listening to Emely's story and her fascinating explanations about the intersections of racial identity, literature, and mental health will leave you lit. Oh, one more thing. This interview was actually recorded inside the Read, Write, and Create sanctuary, so the audio isn't the best. And the beginning and the end of the interview is a bit abrupt because I cut out all the kikiing that was going on between Emely and the members of the sanctuary. But don't worry, it's still an amazing interview with bibliotherapist Emely Rumble. I hope you enjoy it. I'm going to start with the very basic question. Can you define bibliotherapy so that this conversation has a little bit more context?
Absolutely. So bibliotherapy was officially defined in 1966 by the American Library Association, essentially as the use of selected texts for the curation of life's problems or emotional problems. So when you think about bibliotherapy, it's really about the prescription of literary works to solve emotional or psychological issues.
And if I'm not mistaken, it had an early start in England, in the United Kingdom. Can you tell us a little bit about that history and how it kind of got momentum in the UK before here in the US?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know much about the origins in England, but I did study at the University of York my junior year in England. And that's when I became familiar with the work of Ella Berthoud, Susan Alderkin, who are very well established bibliotherapists in the UK. I actually learned about the early roots of bibliotherapy here in the United States during World War One. And this was where essentially the Veterans Administration hospitals would create libraries for soldiers who were deployed to war. And so it wasn't atypical to see a library being built on an army base so that soldiers could have a connection back home. And also, this is where you start to see the likes of librarians, but also folks like Zadie Peterson Delaney, who started off her career as a social worker, then became a librarian. And these are bibliotherapists that were hired early on to develop libraries in hospitals, on army bases, and in different settings where books could be prescribed for healing purposes.
So fascinating. And,
Yeah.
many of us who are writers were readers first. So that's not
Yeah.
surprising to hear that people would say, oh, you have this problem. Maybe this book could help you. But to think of it being codified. So can you talk a
Yeah.
little bit about studying bibliotherapy as an actual therapy method?
I'll start by saying that for me, I definitely was a voracious reader as a little girl. My grandmother raised me. I'm the daughter of two teen parents who were shipped off to Puerto Rico, and my dad enlisted in the military when I was born. And so when my grandmother passed away, I was a foster kid until I emancipated myself at the age of 16. So books literally raised me. Like it was something where I wasn't parented. I was grandparented. So after my grandmother passed, like this notion of going to a book to find answers to life problems was like very foundational to who I became coming of age. But in terms of the way that a therapist would incorporate the use of literature, there's sort of three ways to think about it. There's three pillars. And so the first is receptive, prescriptive. And this is where a therapist might say, based on your therapy goals, hey, I think you should read this book because maybe this book will give you some context for the work that you're doing in therapy or provide some meaningful insights. Maybe you're someone who reads already and you decide that you've read a fictional book that really elicited some emotion and you want to bring it to your therapist and kind of process it together. This is a way that a therapist can help meaningful connections be made between your life and the text. And this is a great way to incorporate literature into talk therapy because, first of all, not everybody's comfortable with talk therapy, having somebody in your face asking you very vulnerable personal questions, right? So I think the incorporation of fiction, especially, allows us to look at our life from a distance through the lens of fictional characters. And that's the way that I love to use bibliotherapy. I started off my career as a school social worker, so it wasn't uncommon for me to have kids who are mandated for counseling not want to come to the counseling room. And so I started pushing into ELA classrooms, working with ELA teachers to make the novels that we were reading come to life. And I'd make it relevant to the children's goals, their social emotional goals, or just making it fun in the classroom so that it wasn't just like, oh, me and Lewis are working on his anger. Instead, it becomes, oh, we're talking about ways to regulate our emotions as we are discussing this text. And we find creative ways to make it, I guess you could say this is sort of receptive prescriptive in the way that we would engage the students to write a letter to a main character. We would role play scenes from a book. Sometimes we would have the students write a different ending to a book. If they were not satisfied with the way that a story ended, we can start to sort of engage the students around their imaginative thinking. And that in and of itself is an emotional process because you have to emotionally connect to a character to give a damn about the way things turn out. And so using sort of like an understanding of storyline, of plot, of the tension of a hero's journey, like you can really engage a client, a student, anyone that you're sort of working with on an emotional goal to do some good work and to learn a lot about themselves. So that's sort of the receptive prescriptive piece, but it's also the next pillar, which is expressive creative. And this is where we start engaging creatively with text. So some of what I just shared gets done a lot in the therapy room. Like sometimes you might have a therapist say, hey, write a letter to your inner child, write a letter to a past version of yourself. Maybe there's a book that you know that your mother loved to read. And so let's bring that book into the therapy session. Let's read a passage that she used to read to you often when you were a little girl, right? Like there's so many different ways that bibliotherapy can become a vehicle to reflect on past versions of self, to imagine, right, future possibilities for self. I think sometimes we get stuck too in like our problems, or emotions become stagnant because we live in a culture where it's like go, 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 go. So there's a way that reading allows us the luxury to just like be still and really reflect. So that's receptive, prescriptive, expressive, creative. And then the next pillar is symbolic, ceremonial. So this is where we engage in ritual practice and symbolic practice using books or literature, poetry. Expressive writing is a component of all of this. So when I say like the use of literature, I'm also talking about writing, because expressive writing is key and central to bibliotherapy. So symbolic ceremonial could look so many different ways as well. We see this at vigils, we see this at funerals where somebody might read a holy scripture, or somebody might read a poem in honor of the person whose life is being honored. So essentially those are the three main pillars, but there's many different ways that you can engage in this work, like depending on if it's a therapist, a pastor, a librarian, a teacher using bibliotherapy. But that's sort of like the main framework for how that would look in healing practice.
Every time you talk about this, Emily, I get all lit up inside because I feel like books are, like I say, memoir is medicine. I almost feel like I do prescribe books sometimes. Certain books
You do.
I prescribe to myself.
Yeah.
I'm like, I need to read that book again because I feel a certain way and I need to feel this way. So what you're saying is essentially validating what I'm sure a lot of people feel automatically or felt intrinsically. And now you're just, again, you're putting words around it. You're putting a structure around what we kind of do naturally. And that's just so exciting. One other just kind of technical question. So you have a background in social work and therapy. Is bibliotherapy something you can actually major in or study, or is it something that's kind of like I took the things I knew in social work and then combined it with my love of books? Like, could I go and become a bibliotherapist if I took a class, or is it a whole training? Tell us a little bit about how one would become a bibliotherapist.
Yeah, well, we live in a capitalistic society that's obsessed with credentialism and education and degrees. And so there are definitely certification programs. The title wouldn't be bibliotherapist necessarily, but depending on where you train, there are different paths you could take. So the main credentialing international organization for bibliotherapy is the International Federation for Bibliopoetry Therapy. And I can send you some information to share after our chat, but essentially it's ifbpt.org. And this is the organization that I have been trained in. I decided not to complete my training because it's just very whitewashed, and again, with the way that it's structured, it's very gate kept. There's only like 6 mentors, certified mentors that you can train under, and they're all white. I just decided not to move forward with it, but it's not because I didn't have a good experience. I did. For me, I have a child with a disability and 2 little kids, and it just didn't feel like it was worth my time, money, and energy to continue. But I do recommend that if people are interested in training or pursuing a particular path, that you check out IFBPT, or you can just join professional organizations with folks who are doing this work who may or may not be credentialed. So I'm a part of the National Association of Poetry Therapy, and they have different credits that you can acquire by attending workshops and webinars. And, like any credentialing program, they have requirements around like how many courses for how many years and things that you've got to do. My path was a poetry therapy facilitator path. And I had a good experience overall, but it wasn't, I will say, it wasn't like anything that I didn't already know. And I just felt like I was really unhappy with the lack of diversity on a leadership level and on an administrative level. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other organizations who might offer credentialing paths. Because I know I have a few friends and colleagues who are also expressive arts therapists, and they have chosen different paths. But I don't know anyone who has work directly with IFBPT who's ever had like a mentor of color or a Black mentor. And that's a problem for me. So I'm just keeping it real with y'all. But there are different organizations. And now that it's becoming more popularized, I do see more and more people offering bibliotherapy courses. My hope in the future, I've been like really trying to manifest this, is to create my own program.
I was going to say, that sounds like you identifying an opportunity, but
Right. So we'll see what Spirit has, planned for that.
So you kind of already led into this a little bit, but tell us what, like when you and I spoke earlier, we talked about the fact that there might actually be lists or like prescription lists. So like books can be organized in such a way that a bibliotherapist might be able to look at like, well, what books are good for, I'm just being general, but depression, or what books are good for people who are suffering from this or that or the other thing. And you had mentioned that a lot of times those lists, those prescription lists, tend to be books by white authors. Can you talk a little bit about the need for BIPOC stories, books to be incorporated into these? Because obviously bibliotherapy is not only for white people. So tell us a little bit about, what the lists look like or how they're created, and maybe even how BIPOC writers might get their books on these lists or maybe create the list. So talk a little bit about that, please.
So immediately what comes to mind is The Novel Cure by Ella Berthoud. It was published in 2012. It was the first book that I saw by a world-renowned bibliotherapist that created such a list. So, she has everything from like, if you're depressed, read these novels, to if you broke a leg, read these novels, right? And like, that's pretty nifty and cool. I had never seen anything like that before. And I love Ella. And like, I'm really grateful to her because she's been a huge champion of my work since before I got my book deal. So shout out to her. But for me, as a African-American Puerto Rican therapist who's also a spiritual therapist, I just don't prescribe books that way. Like, I'm very intuitively led. I like to do a reading intake with my clients to get a sense of who they are as readers, what they gravitate towards in books. I'm very trauma informed in that way. So like, if there's anything that you avoid in books, I want to know that. We all know as readers and people who like devour books that there's certain things we're drawn to. There's certain things that we're not interested in reading. And then there's certain things that are very disturbing to us in books. So it's really important that all of that be respected. And I think what tends to happen, as happens in publishing, is that BIPOC authors get iced out of those lists because, one, especially if you're an indie writer, it's very rare that somebody might be familiar with your work or that someone's going to champion your work on a larger stage for it to make a list, like a list that's in the Novel Cure. But also, we have to deal with racism, right? Systemic oppression on these stages. And so that's like a very real thing too. I think for me, I think about this often because I'm excited about Bibliotherapy in the Bronx coming out, but it's been such a long journey. And I know that my work wouldn't have been taken seriously asserting myself as a Black Puerto Rican therapist who uses this approach had I not been licensed, had I not been affiliated with IFBPT, had I not had, a mentor who's a white Jewish woman from New York. Like, there's so many different ways I could even look back on my own journey and be like, yeah, people are interested in my work and they want my lists and they want me to prescribe them books. But it's also because I had to earn that trust and that respect. And to some degree, I think we all have to do that, right? Like, you have to show people who you are and how you work, and you have to show that you're good at what you do before anyone's going to want to engage with you. But I think that that's a really big issue for the people who make it on these lists or who are regarded as like serious bibliotherapists or people who have the skill and the expertise enough to prescribe literature. And beyond Ella Berthoud's work, I haven't seen too many lists outside of like what librarians do. I think this is a big sort of vehicle that happens like in libraries, especially libraries who have librarians who are Black and BIPOC and like diverse librarians who are really committed to curating diverse literature. And that's why I see it the most done well and done with like integrity and done with diversity at the forefront that honors marginalized stories. I always know when I walk into a library, like, whether or not they got some good bibliotherapy going on, because usually there will be a table set up that will say like the best grief books for kids, for example. And then you go and you see like, oh, it's BIPOC representation, right? But it's rare. I mean, how many times have you walked into a public library, maybe in a new city that you've never been to, and seen something like that? So I'm always aware of that. That's the first thing I look at when I walk into a bookstore or a library is like, how are they curating their shelves? That tends to be how I think about book lists and prescriptive receptive lists, because I think that this is like a newer concept. I went on Etsy recently and I saw like a few therapists had some PDFs that you could buy on Etsy that were like best books for depression, best books for anxiety. But again, even if they're therapists of color, the list isn't always representative of writers of color. So like, it's tricky.
I remember when I was talking to Emely, I was like, because she said that she, just said that you're very intuitive about figuring out what people need. You're not just using a list. And I was like, so does that mean you've read 1 million books? And you said, Yes. So,
Yeah.
yes, I have. So, talk a little bit about your reading habits and how do you read? And when you read, do you ever read for pleasure? Or are you always reading like, how is this going to fit into my mental shelf of possibilities? Do you have a special way of keeping track of what you read?
For me, reading is always pleasure. Even if it's more than that, like reading is always pleasure. This is like my neurodivergent way of being in the world. And also, like I shared, right? Like books raised me. So for me, it's like I'm never not reading. And because I now, I do this work, there is a distinction between like my personal reading and then my reading for work because I facilitate bibliotherapy groups and individual sessions every week. So sometimes I'm reading just for the curation of a session or creating like a book club guide, or for my sessions, I often curate bibliotherapy slides that will structure my therapy session. So that's like probably the only distinction between how I read is like for personal reasons or for professional reasons. But really, like, it's crazy over here, Lori. I don't have a system. I'm not gonna lie to you. I don't have a system. I'm a poly reader, so I'm always reading like multiple books at a time. And for me, it's delightful when I find a book that makes me put every other book down because I am always reading for work. So when that happens, I will cancel my weekend. And like my friends hate me for that. But I'll be like, look, ladies, I got to finish this book. So I'm known for that in my friendship circle. They're like, oh Lord, here she goes. She's at home reading. Sometimes my girls will we're coming over. You need to leave the house. Cause I am always just me and my books. And I love it that way. Yeah, I wouldn't say I have much of a system other than what I do for professional reasons to keep track of what resonates with different clients. So I do keep track of that. Like if I have an experience where there's one novel that has really helped me with, let's say, suicidal clients, I'm going to make note of that because in my progress notes, I've already been tracking session after session what's resonating with clients, what's helping clients to find hope in hopelessness, what's helping clients to find meaning in otherwise very traumatic, painful situations. This is kind of how I keep track. For me, I think of it like a book apothecary, like where's the medicine and who have I prescribed it to where it's made a difference.
So, along those lines, what is your book that's coming out, Bibliotherapy in the Bronx? Can you tell us what it's about? Is it memoir? Is it how to be a bibliotherapist?
Bibliotherapy in the Bronx, y'all. I'm so excited for it to be in the world. So I think it's a mix. I wanted the book to be educational, but I wanted it to be relatable. And so I did a lot of like balancing storytelling aspects with practical insights on bibliotherapy. So I do share a bit about my life because that's crucial to understanding like how I got here. But at the heart of it is really the stories of my clients. It's got probably a solid 8 in-depth case studies and then like sprinkled throughout book prescriptions that I've given to clients with different life ailments and how I've actually structured the sessions and how I've helped them using literature, poetry, hip hop therapy, and expressive writing. So I'm so excited because it's also like this book is a community book. Like, yeah, it's built upon my practice, but my practice is a communal practice. So like I feel like this book is like all of ours. It's also a celebration and I feel like it's ancestral veneration because Dr. Sadie Peterson Delaney, known as the godmother of bibliotherapy, she has not been honored in the way that she deserves to be. In the literature on bibliotherapy, whether it be a scholarly journal or a book on bibliotherapy, she's nowhere to be found in the books, but she's actually known as the godmother of bibliotherapy. She was the head librarian at Tuskegee, and she did such great work with delinquent youth, with the blind. She just did such amazing work with veterans there that New York City actually contacted her when they were creating the library on 135th Street, which is now known as the Schomburg Center for Black Culture. Essentially, she did such great work down south that they sent her up north to establish the bibliotherapy library at the Schomburg. And when I went up there to do my research for the book, I literally get chills like every time I talk about it. It makes me emotional because in all my years of school and all my training in bibliotherapy, I had never heard her name. And I remember reading, I don't even remember when I first saw her name. I think I was reading a letter that Eleanor Roosevelt wrote to someone, and she had mentioned Dr. Sadie Peterson Delaney, the godmother of bibliotherapy. And I was like, hold up, she's Black. So like I went and I started doing a deep dive and I was like, oh no, so here I am at the Schomburg doing research for the book, holding a letter. Like, yo, I get so emotional because like if I would have known this in my 20s, I'm 39 years old. There's no reason I've been studying this since I was 19 and I just learned about Dr. Sadie Peterson Delaney. Like I'm holding a letter that Countee Cullen during the Harlem Renaissance wrote to her saying, thank you for using my poetry to help our community heal. Y'all, I was sitting there going through the letters of Dr. Sadie Peterson Delaney, and it's available. If you guys are interested, you're ever in New York City and you want to go through them, you just have to make an appointment. It's open to the public, but nobody knows her name. And I'm reading this and I'm just like bawling. And the librarian comes up to me. She's like, you okay? So I tell her, I'm like, I'm writing a book on bibliotherapy. Like I'm African-American and Puerto Rican. I've been doing this work my whole career. I didn't even know her name. And then she starts crying. She was a Black librarian. So like she and I are just sitting there boohooing. And of course, in true library tradition, she's like, okay, Emely, like, let's not get the tears on the materials though. But I say that to say, like, this is ancestral veneration because it's the Black librarians, it's Dr. Sadie Peterson Delaney who contributed to this field, but whose name has been erased from the books and the history. Like, I'm writing them back into the books where they belong. And I hope that somebody after me takes that torch and like continues to do, a deep dive. My prayer would be to write a follow-up book to this strictly about Dr. Sadie Peterson Delaney, but nobody could find her estate. I contacted so many different people. I've made so many calls. I've sent so many letters. Nobody knows who's in charge of her estate. So this is like a whole rich history of a Black woman who has helped our community heal using literature at the intersection of social work and librarianship, who we don't really have more information. There is a library named in her honor right now, and this is recent, in Poughkeepsie, New York, where she studied as a social worker, but nobody knows who owns her estate. So even like some of the pictures and the letter from Countee Cullen and things that I wanted to incorporate in the book, I wasn't able to get permissions for, which breaks my heart because I just want more people to know about her. But yeah, I feel like this is a Black librarian book and it's for us by us. So I'm hoping that adds to the narrative on how we use books to heal in our communities. And I just want people to feel celebrated.
I'm curious if the authors ever know that their books have been used. I mean, I guess they'll know now when they read your book, but like, do you ever reach out to authors to say, hey, your book has helped me with these people, with these clients, and I just want you to know that? Do you ever reach out to them? Do they ever have a way?
All the time. Yeah,
cool.
I reach out to authors all the time. I don't know if other people do, but that was something that I learned from Dr. Sadie Peterson Delaney, because as I was reading through her letters, I saw that this was how I found my strategy. It was through her because she built relationships with publishing houses, specifically to get advanced readers copies of Black authors' books. And she would use them in her work. And then whenever she was heralded by, let's say, the Library of Congress, or she was also in a sorority, it's escaping me right now which one, but whenever she was honored, she would like shout out the author. Any visibility that she ever had, she was using it to amplify the work of BIPOC authors and poets. And so I kind of like took a page from that book, and that's how I run my online platform. And if I have a session where something deeply resonates, I often like to like encourage my client to reach out to the author. Like most recently, Kiese Lehman, who's one of my favorite authors, I had a client do a whole journal entry based on Long Division. There's a part in Long Division where Citoyen makes a list of affirmations and she rewrote the affirmations through her eyes. And I told her to send it to him and she did. And he responded. And she was a wreck. She was like, oh my God, Emely, he wrote back to me. I'm like, of course he did, because that's just so Kiese. He's so down to earth and so real. And he's just a light in this world. But I know, like, as her therapist, I know what that meant to her. Not only to have had a process with me in the therapy room, but then to share it with him. And for him to like, I think she said that he was like emotional, like audibly emotional, because he sent her a voice note back in the DMs. But she has that for the rest of her life. She's never going to forget that. You know, she was like, I even had to like screen record the message to keep it so I could play it back to myself. Because that's book medicine, right? Like it extends past the book and the way that we emotionally connect to the book and the connections we make from the book. But also now she's got this whole other experience where she connected with Kiese. So that's so beautiful. Yeah.
All right. Do you have goosebumps after that interview? I do. even listening to it after the fact. Emely Rumble literally makes me want to go get my certification and become a bibliotherapist. I will definitely leave the links to all of the references that she shared in the show notes. Now, I really hope that after listening to Emely and learning about bibliotherapy, that you realize how important your books are in the world. Your stories, your memoirs, and novels could be the perfect prescription for someone in pain. And I'm talking to you, my BIPOC authors and authors-to-be. If this isn't the kick in the pants you need to see that your stories matter beyond the bookshelves and bestseller lists, your books could save a life. If it's in your budget, go buy a copy of Emely's book, Bibliotherapy in the Bronx. Remember to shop indie and not at the online retailer that rhymes with Glamazon. And if you can't afford to buy a copy, please go get Bibliotherapy in the Bronx from your local library. Hey, before you go, remember, if you're looking for more creative writing inspiration and useful resources for your writing life, then be sure to check out the Read, Write, and Create website at readwriteandcreate.com. That's REED, writeandcreate.com. While you're over there on the website, you can sign up for the Read, Write, and Create newsletter. And speaking of the newsletter, if you want updates about the Sanctuary, our private membership community for BIPOC women writers who take their writing seriously, then you definitely want to get on the Tell Me More About the Sanctuary waitlist. We will actually be taking new member applications to the Sanctuary at the end of May, but only from people who are on that waitlist. So again, if you're interested in joining the Sanctuary, make sure you get on the Tell Me More waitlist to get an invitation. I will, of course, leave the link for that waitlist in the show notes. The Read, Write, and Create podcast is written and produced by me, Lori L. Tharps. Our editor is Brad Linder, and our theme music is by Wataboy. Until next week, keep writing. The world needs more BIPOC stories by BIPOC storytellers just like you.